Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Grand. I'm the CEO here at MedTech Innovator. Welcome to our MedTech Innovator Live webinar series. This is our Asia Pacific webinar series. So we're focused in these sessions on companies that are interested in accessing the Asia Pacific markets, but we're also talking to companies that want to access markets all over the world. And for those of you who don't know MedTech Innovator, if this is your first time, what we're trying to do here is find the world's best companies, the companies that are really going to transform care, the ones that have the opportunity to bend the cost curve, improve outcomes, and we want to make sure these companies are successful. And as part of that, we bring together the experts from all across the world who have the opportunity to share their knowledge, to share their experience with the emerging companies. Because at the end of the day, for the most part, every one of these emerging companies is going to wind up partnering in some way with a larger company. So we want to make sure we bring that expertise together early on with these companies, early enough when we have a chance to make an impact. Because the worst thing that can happen is someone spends all this time and all this energy and all this money in an area of great unmet medical need and then makes mistakes that cost them the ability to succeed in the market, and ultimately the patients and others all lose out. So we want to make sure these companies are successful, and that's what this webinar series is about. In addition to helping the companies in the MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific cohort directly, they'll be here on our Zoom. We also invite the outside audience via YouTube Live to participate as well. So if you have questions and you're watching on YouTube, put them in the little box over there on the side. One of our team members will relay them to our moderator, who will try and get your questions into this first hour. Of course, if you're here as part of the cohort, you get to ask your questions during our Q&A at the end of the Zoom. So that's how this all works. I'm going to introduce our MC for today, Frederick Nyberg, who's MedTech Innovator's Managing Director for Asia Pacific. He'll lead the discussion. He'll introduce the panelists. And I also want to point out, this is our 10th in our episode in our webinar series this year. So we've had a really great set of discussions. If you just go to medtechinnovator.org/APAC live, you'll be able to look at all the past conversations, all the discussions, and it's been a really, really interesting set of discussions and webinars. So I highly encourage you to do that. So with that, let me have Frederick take the reins here, and he'll introduce the panel for today. Thanks everyone for being here.
Great, thank you very much, Paul, and a very warm welcome everyone to this final webinar in our MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific Accelerator series. My name is Frederick Nyberg. I'm based here in Singapore. I'm Managing Director for the Asia Pacific program. Today's webinar topic is commercialization, managing key opinion leader networks, sales and distribution. And just a quick reminder before we get started, the first 60 minutes of this webinar will be live streamed on YouTube, as Paul mentioned, and that will be followed by 30 minutes of closed-door Q&A for our cohort companies. So as Paul mentioned as well, we began this webinar series some 3 months ago or so, and we've covered a broad range of topics from product design and development to regulatory, clinical challenges, reimbursement, even cybersecurity. So it's only appropriate that we wrap things up with this final session on the topic of commercialization. And I'm absolutely thrilled and very honored to have an exceptional panel here today. And I have to say, these are true industry veterans, and I'll have them introduce themselves in just a moment. We have Sanjay Prabhakaran here. Welcome, Sanjay. Sanjay is co-founder of Asian Mentor Circle. He was previously the president Asia Pacific for Hologic and the former president Asia Pacific for Baxter International. He'll introduce himself in just a moment. We have Ken Nelson here, currently head of digital health and diagnostics and monitoring at Biotronik, and formerly chief commercial officer at Bardi Diagnostics. And he'll tell us more about that. But Bardi Diagnostics was is a remote patient monitoring company that was part of the MedTech Innovator US cohort in 2019, I believe. And they were just recently acquired by Hillrom for $375 million. Very nice exit for them just a few months ago. So he's on the panel as well. Welcome, Ken, and thank you for staying up late. Ken is dialing in from Boston, and we have Chikaresh Das here from Ontogenics. He's held senior strategic marketing roles both with Philips as well as with GE Healthcare. So I'll do the rounds. I get each of our panelists to very briefly introduce themselves. Tell us a bit about your leadership in managing sales, marketing, and general management, and your role in medtech and digital health commercialization, and maybe just give us your perspective on when you believe a medical technology startup should really start thinking about its go-to-market strategy. And maybe Sanjay, I'll turn to you first.
Well, thank you, Frederick. So let me first introduce myself. As Frederick mentioned, I've had 30 years in the corporate world, working with some of the large companies, starting off with Roche, Boehringer Ingelheim, Boston Scientific, Baxter, and then Hologic. So in the course of these 30 years, I've dealt with products which are from the diagnostics, the IVD space, to the medical consumables like cardio and neurovascular implants, to large volume consumables, which companies like Baxter promote, and then also the medical equipment side, and some part of the women's health part of the portfolio. Now, in these 30 years, I've also had the opportunity to work across some of the key countries, largely in the Asia Pacific region, having lived and worked in India for several years, in China for 5 years, and ASEAN for many other years over the period of time. But in my previous 2 leadership roles across Asia Pac, I've had the chance to oversee countries in Australia, New Zealand, Korea, Japan. So I have a reasonable understanding of what it takes to build businesses, be successful in this part of the world. And I know it's not going to get any more easier. It's only going to get more and more difficult in the years ahead, as a lot of the change that is coming through on regulations, reimbursement, and commercialization. And we'll hopefully touch on that. Frederick brought out the question, what is the right time? I think the right time for commercialization is when a founder is clear that they have a product that is ready to be socialized internally, at least. Right? So you don't want to start commercialization without having any idea, but at least you need to have some concept about, okay, I have a product, now I need to start figuring out when and how to take it out. And that's where the journey starts beginning with stakeholders, which are very small in size, which is most probably your KOLs, your advisors, who start giving you some input. Now, I'm making the assumption that you had market research of some nature, that's why you came up with the idea or the concept. So your concept is not totally wild and off the reservation, right? And that's your start point. What you got to then start thinking in your commercialization journey will be, are you going to be competing with somebody, or are you going to be collaborating with somebody? And I'm sure we'll touch upon that a little as we go into this conversation later, because that determines your path forward and what you're going to do with respect to how you take the approach as you start thinking of the next level of commercialization. So I'll pause there, Frederick, and pass it over to the next panelist.
Great, thanks very much for that, Sanjay. And Ken, please.
Sure. I'm Ken Nelson, the head of digital health diagnostics and monitoring for Biotronik, which is an implantable cardiac digital health and diagnostics company, more known for their pacemakers and defibrillators. I've been in medtech for 20 years, started with Guidant and then Boston Scientific, post-acquisition and cardiac rhythm management, so pacemakers, defibrillators, implantable devices in the first half. And then the last 10 years, really commercializing 3 of the 4, what have become 3 of the 4 biggest players in the cardiac digital health remote patient monitoring world. First with iRhythm, and then biotelemetry after that, which was recently acquired by Philips. And then most recently with Barty Diagnostics for 3 years as their chief commercial officer, where I also went through the MedTech Innovator program. And I can talk about that at some point. But great experience, and that eventually led to the acquisition by Hillrom several weeks ago. And so now I've been asked to kind of bring the external wearable world together with the injectable world, and how does that fit into the digital health ecosystem? So it's been a lot of fun. In terms of answering your question, there's so many dynamics that go into when's the right time to think about commercialization. I think number one, there has to be reimbursement figured out. So if there aren't reimbursement codes, then that could delay when you want to commercialize. But for sure, if there's reimbursement already established, at least 6 months before you're going to commercialize that product, you really want to get started. Probably 12 months or so before you're going to get clinical approval in whatever country that you're wanting to commercialize in. And then if you don't have a distributor network set up, I mean, that may even start earlier than that, trying to figure out who might either from a distributor standpoint commercialize the product, or if you're going to build a direct sales team, it takes time to recruit that team, to train that team, figure out the right profile. So there's just a lot of dynamics that go into each specific situation before you commercialize.
Great, thanks very much for that, Ken. And Shikaresh, I'll turn to you as well.
Thanks, Frederick. So my background is probably slightly different in the sense that I came from distributor SME and moved to the MNC. So I have probably seen both sides of the coin. We are struggling with limited funds to whether to pay the salaries or pay the bills, kind of a thing, and exciting world of the MNC. So in the MNC sector, I worked with Agilent, Agile Manager for ASEAN here. Then I moved into Philips. I had 2 verticals under me. And then finally, I was with GE as a director for emerging markets. And emerging markets, that was an interesting discussion, probably for another day. That sort of spanned from China to Argentina. And I picked up a lot of gems along the way, which I apply today in my day-to-day work. And one of the interesting episodes I leave you with is that in Brazil, you could plug in you have an electrical plug for running your appliance. You could plug it into 110 volt or 220 volt, either of the two. They look exactly the same, slight modifications. So we had 110 volt equipment blowing up and all that stuff. So I think when the startups move out, these are the exact things they face with an unknown geographical usage model. And that's what we've been trying to solve and assess them with for the last 5 years. So currently I head Ontogenics, very super specialized in market entry. And we sort of, Paul mentioned earlier, costly mistakes, do it early. And that's exactly what we try to help them to avoid. And look forward to more discussions here.
Thank you, Shikaresh. So let's maybe start on the topic of key opinion leader engagement. And many, of course, and if not all startups in our industry are founded or supported by clinician inventors or by local champions in a local nearby hospital. But a question that we get very often is, how does a small company identify and engage with KOLs beyond that initial circle and build not even adoption, but just starting an initial conversation about its product and its solution to KOLs outside of that initial circle? And maybe, Ken, I'll turn to you first on that, because it's something you must have gone through relatively recently.
Yeah, sure. So there's a handful of ways to do it. I think, one way that is fairly easy to access is through the society. So for us in the cardiac world, it's Heart Rhythm Society, American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and they can help you identify who the big key opinion leaders are. And you can tell by who the speakers are consistently at these events and who the bigger companies are using to give talks on their products. So that's one way. A really fast path is to leverage your investors, and the investors will typically know key opinion leaders in the space, and they can actually get you time with those key opinion leaders. And we really utilize that as much as we possibly could with venture capital guys and others invested in the company. And then I can tell you, even through MedTech Innovator, working with different people from industry, talking with Paul and the sponsors of MedTech Innovator are so connected in the startup ecosystem, from investors to key opinion leaders to any part of the startup ecosystem, that they were very helpful as well. In fact, one of the introductions from MedTech Innovator was Health Tech Arkansas. And that was another accelerator program that we went through, and they made firsthand introductions and actually guaranteed us clinical trials, or at least clinical testing of the technology as part of that program. And that was all that all happened through introductions through MedTech Innovator.
Excellent. That's very good to hear. We'll talk more about that during our Q&A as well. Thanks, Ken. Sanjay, I want to turn to you for maybe the MNC perspective on best practices in key opinion leader engagement and perhaps some potential pitfalls in working with KOLs as well.
Yeah. So, Frederick, along with that, I'll maybe just make a comment on what Ken was talking about.
Please.
For startups, I know a lot of the focus is on getting access to a KOL. But what you tend to forget is when you get access to a KOL, are you ready with your pitch? Because these are all reasonably busy individuals who, you heard of the elevator pitch. With KOLs, we don't have elevator pitch, we have corridor walk. And the corridors are getting shorter and shorter in many hospitals, which means you only have maybe 15 seconds, 20 seconds sometimes to just tell your story, whatever you're going to say. So a lot of the energy is put on, can I get access to someone? You will get access sooner or later. But when you get access, there's your one shot to have a right story there. So I would say focus more on the story that you're going to tell them that attracts them to want to talk to you and engage with you. Beyond that, then you're at least in the right place. And getting the access, sooner or later, you will be able to get access because there are many avenues today that allows you to get there. Now, coming to the question on the best practices with the KOL engagement, it first starts with, what's it for the KOL? So as a multinational, generally, KOLs are also human beings who are driven by a motivation. So what motivates them? For some, the motivation is the recognition that they get. So in the early days of many of our portfolios, they used to be the first early adopters of a technology that gives them the chance to go and proctor in many other countries, and that gives them the visibility and raises their standing in the country and internationally also, regionally, internationally. They get excited by that. They are like the fighter pilots, right? Many of the doctors we know in our specialties are like fighter pilots. They like the new toys, the new tools, and they want to make the best use of it and then speak about it. So you need to think about what is in it for them that you're going to do, right? And you've got to find that right motivation, because if you find the right partnership with the right KOL, you will see that they're very, open in accepting you and your organization, and then start working with you in the iterations of the products that come out. Another aspect to think about, which maybe is something when you're getting into many of these relationships, watch out for the compliance, because today in many countries we have very high standards of integrity and compliance that are set out. US especially is very high. In Asia, still it's a little, I would say, uneven across countries. But if you want to, there's an easy path and there's a right path. Always take the right path. The easy path is going to take you down very soon. So the right path may be tougher, more difficult, but take the right path. So always remember that, especially when you're dealing with many different stakeholders, because like I said, everyone is motivated by different things, and you will find some who are motivated by not so right things also. So I just want you to be aware of that as a pitfall.
That's a great point, and I'm glad you brought up the topic of compliance early in today's conversation. And for the startups online, what you should do really is go to the AdvaMed website or go to the APAC Med website. And if you haven't already done so, download their codes of ethics so that you understand what the codes of ethics are typically that the multinationals are working with, and make sure that you're in compliance as well. Or you're going to one day when you're looking to execute a trade sale, you're going to fail the due diligence. So that's something that you want to do fairly early on. Ken, just a quick question back to you on how the COVID pandemic perhaps has affected the KOL engagement in the US, and you've done work in Europe as well.
Yeah, so obviously we had to switch early on to find other ways to engage the customer with with our world. First with the external monitoring world, and now with the implantable world, there was a big need for the technology even during the pandemic. So for a while we couldn't get in person with the physicians, but they soon opened back up to doing that pretty quickly after. But we transitioned our business model and adapted it so that we could send devices directly to the patient's home. So we took the opportunity to spend time and talk to physicians through Zoom and through Teams and through these new applications, and to talk about things like telehealth and remote patient monitoring and how do we work together to provide solutions that helped patients during COVID. And really, it was the catalyst, I think, that our digital health world really needed. It's unfortunate that it was COVID, but COVID was absolutely a catalyst for digital health, for telehealth, for remote patient monitoring. And so we figured out different ways to engage the customer, and they were very open to getting on Teams and other platforms and talking to our team. You just had to ask them. So we were very upfront with physicians and said, hey, we'd love to interact with you. You know, what's your preference right now? And in the normal world, we would have to pay physicians to talk to the sales team. During the pandemic, they never asked for money at all. They knew we were really trying to help the situation. And so it was just being open and honest, and what's the best way you prefer to interact with our teams. And they really appreciated us asking that. And I think it helped us. And personally, with Bardi, we got back to pre-COVID levels within something like 60 days, and we were at record volumes really by end of April, beginning of May of 2020, because we did that. So we just really shifted the way we thought about things.
Interesting. Thanks, Ken. And Sanjay, what have you seen in Asia PAC during the pandemic, in terms of not just KOL interaction, but maybe general clinician interaction as well?
I think even before COVID, there has been a certain challenge emerging in some of the countries where access to a physician is starting to get more and more difficult. For those of you who may or may not be aware, there are some hospitals in a few countries, and China is one example of that. There are hospitals in Guangzhou where if you need to access the physician in the working hours of a hospital, you need to actually make a payment to the hospital. Only then they'll allow you to go into the hospital and meet a physician. So it is starting to become difficult in that sense. So you've got to either find the lunch hours, the coffee hour, or post work hours to be able to access physicians. But on the other side, as Ken brought out the very good point, because of COVID, you found that even the most busiest physicians were actually sitting, I would say, more on the idle side than the busy side, which they usually used to. Because with COVID, a lot of elective procedures went on hold. So naturally, you ended up having more time on your hand. This is a great opportunity to actually access physicians, and they are also more willing to engage. So that, I think, was maybe the best outcome that came out in a way. I know COVID is a negative, but if there's a positive outcome of it, I think I reiterate what Ken said, that there's more openness, more awareness in terms of the physician community also to say, we also need to find ways to change the approach. It doesn't have to be physical space. We should be more comfortable to get connected into the virtual, through the virtual world. And I think that's helping a lot of companies who are engaging, connecting, including our selling organizations. When we do webinars in the past, I think if we did a webinar, the attendance would have been very, very small because people prefer the physical meetings in whichever location they get to interact. But when we switched on to the virtual world of, the digital world of selling, we found that the acceptance was it was a smooth transition. So I think we ourselves sometimes resist thinking that, oh, these people won't change, the doctors won't change. I don't think it's them not changing, it's actually we are not changing fast enough. The mental block is actually in us, not in them to start with.
That's an interesting point. And thanks for that, Sanjay. Something to think about here for sure. What I wanted to do here is move on to talk a little bit about commercial models, and maybe we'll start at the basics here just for our audience, and I'll turn to Shikaresh first on this, and maybe just provide some definitions to our cohort here in terms of the basic commercial models, direct, indirect, hybrid. What are they? What are some of the key differences?
I think you actually defined it pretty well or rather structured it pretty well to start with. So Initially, when a startup is going to a new country, it can be very expensive to set up a direct operations there in terms of your direct manpower, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the startups prefer or rather can afford to go only the indirect channel. What indirect means is that you are having a full function distributor. You're outsourcing all your sales, service, marketing to the distributor. And as the distributor gains traction, probably after 2 or 3 years, you change that model a bit. Maybe you put a clinical head or a country manager there, and then you're running a hybrid operation. So this sort of brings up the added confidence in the customers, and distributor gets additional support. And finally, maybe after 5 years or so, when you see the country is showing a consistent growth, it has to be consistent growth, and the policies, in that case, you switch to a direct model. That means you have your own sales force on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. But having said that, even the multinationals sometimes prefer to have a hybrid model. And we have seen in Southeast Asia specifically, and also in China, people switch back and forth between the full direct and hybrid operations because sometimes it's cost effective. And whenever the country is not showing promises, not actually keeping the promises of the sales delivery because of economic or other reasons, coming out of a direct operation can be extremely expensive. And that's time the hybrid operation, I think, works best. So these are the starting definitions I'll sort of give for the 3 different models.
Thanks for that. And Sanjay, I'll turn to you here as well, maybe for the multinational perspective in terms of some of these differences in Asia Pacific, and maybe to get your thoughts as well on when a company is working through an indirect model through distributors, how does a company stay in touch with its local clinicians and key opinion leaders? Because you got that sort of filter with that at least one, if not multiple layers of distributors. What are some of those challenges, and how can you overcome that, Sanjay?
Yeah, that's a great question, Frederick. So as I think Shikaresh outlined, right, the direct gives you a lot of control, but it's an expensive proposition. The indirect gives you less control. It's also less expensive. Now you as a startup has to make a decision, where do you want to play direct and where do you want to play indirect? And a lot of it also goes back to your core competence, your financial capabilities, and those are all the factors that will make the decision happen for you. It's actually no different for multinationals also. So you think, I'm sure as a startup, you're sitting and thinking, oh, the multinationals are flush with cash. They don't have to worry about it. No, we actually have to run a P&L. Right? And a P&L is no different for us because even though we're an entity of a large company, but in some ways I look at ourselves also as startups in the region of a large multinational, even though we have presence for many years, most probably. So what we look at doing is we look at what margin profiles are we willing to go for and what is our long term. So I think the first conversation we would like to think about it is, are we here for the long term or are we here for a quick tactical play with a portfolio, right? And as a startup, maybe that's the biggest question I think I need you to ask, for you to ask yourselves. Am I here to build a long-term story with a product portfolio that will iterate? I will have more variations to it and I'll build a business, versus I'm only here to get the valuation going up through a commercial geographic presence. So any potential buyer looks and says, I'm present in 100 countries across the world, and that gives me that financial additional valuation story. That I think starts playing the decisiveness of what you're going to do, right? The relationships, clinical is something for it because it is if it's a product, let's assume it's a physical product we're dealing with in an indirect market. If you just give it to the channel partner has to be well prepared to handle the product for you. If they don't, they can mess it up, your brand suffers significantly. So in the early days of a launch of a product into a market, you need to have your clinical people, whether you call it clinical, medical, or whoever else, try to be as close to the market in the early days because you want to hear the real-time feedback for any course correction, anything to be addressed. If you don't do that, you're going to get some very convoluted feedback coming your way, which makes it difficult for you to also understand what am I going to do now to solve this problem, right? And that I think is where the gaps start emerging out. So try to be as close to the market, but again, prioritize your markets. Don't try to hit 100 countries at the same time. Even in the region, when I used to have a region, we had our priority markets and we had a must-have markets and the nice-to-have markets. The nice-to-have is an afterthought. It's not a first priority, right? And as much as the discipline, the word to remember is focus. So stay focused on where you want to play and where you don't want to play. That will make a huge difference.
Thanks for that, Sanjay. We'll talk in more detail about distributor management in a bit later here during the hour. I want to just turn to Ken for a moment and ask if you've had the experience of working with larger licensing agreements as opposed to working with smaller and individual distributors, because I guess as a startup you have the option of either building organically a network of small distributors, whether in your case it was in Europe or even part of the US, or partner with a large multinational, and they can potentially then license that technology and take it global, at least in theory. What's been your experience in that area? What are some of the pros and cons?
Yeah, so I think with iRhythm, one of the ways we were able to commercialize the product pretty rapidly was through a partnership with St. Jude Medical, which is now Abbott. And so at the time, St. Jude had made investment in the company, and I used the network that I'd built in the cardiac rhythm management space, and I'd go to every medical education program, every fellows education program with the St. Jude reps and with the leadership team, and leverage their relationships and try to build that trust between our sales team and the St. Jude sales team, and then get in front of their customers that they'd have long-standing relationships with. And really, I fundamentally believe that the rapid acceleration of Zeopatch, of iRhythm Zeopatch, really happened in part due to that tight alliance that we had early on with St. Jude. So in that case, it really worked out. I think same company, we partnered with I guess I won't name the partner, but it was a big player in the primary care space, and that partnership didn't work out so well, in part because they had a lot of distributor reps and they had so many products in their portfolio that we just kind of got lost in the portfolio of products that company's reps were selling, and it really didn't work out. It was more of a distraction. So you really have to be careful about who you pick for a co-marketing agreement. But if you pick the right partner, it can be very successful. And like I said, if you pick the wrong one, it can be distracting and kind of a time suck in a way.
Yeah, good feedback. Thanks for that. A term that we're seeing more and more that maybe we should just get some clarity around is omnichannel. And maybe I'll turn to Shikaresh for your very briefly views on this, and then maybe Sanjay, if you've something that you're seeing in your organizations as well, Shikaresh.
Sure.
What is it?
So omnichannel, I think this was a term coined by McKinsey, and I think they sort of took the traditional channels and reclassified under different heads, including e-commerce, and interestingly, they also had digital marketing in there, which I thought was an enabler. But nevertheless, it's not enough for companies to go through a physical distribution. You need to make end customer awareness, and more people are on the net, transacting there, buying there. That's where the e-commerce comes in. So we have seen quite a few good efforts from different companies, but omnichannel is like if you're looking at e-commerce or digital platforms, they are not conducive for all kinds of products. So you have to look at your product portfolio first and see where your customers are. Are they on the net? Are they on the LinkedIn? Where are they? And you have to, these different channels actually are conduits for your distribution. That means take your product to the end customer. And so accordingly, when you figure out where your customers are, you can leverage any of the omnichannel or two of them maybe to take your products to the end consumer. And I think that will be the way.
Right. Sanjay, is this something you've, is it a term that you even used at Hologic, or you had a different approach to?
I think this term, as you know, Frederick, and I mean, only McKinsey can coin terms like this.
Right.
If to keep it simple, I mean, there are two ways of looking at this, right? One is Are you using, other than the physical world of getting access to the end user customer, whoever you call the customer, right? And the customer can be a user, a payer, a provider, whoever you define as a customer. How do you get access to them to be able to communicate? So that's the one part of sharing of information is maybe the first part of the conversation. The second is getting the order. How do you get the ordering process through? So if you take these two in two different buckets to talk about, the first is where it was always in the physical space for a long period of time, because seminars, physical seminars, proctoring, hands-on training, these were all part of what that world was. Companies used to have people fly into places and a lot of demo models and all that. I'll give you one example. Even for an in-house training, I was told once that for an ultrasound that we use in a mammography business, that you can only train an employee hands-on. There is no other way of training it. Guess what? COVID hit. Within 3 months, there was a virtual training being done that you could actually do the same thing for an employee sitting in Australia. We could do it from France. So what changed? The necessity created, the whole situation created the necessity, and it happened out. So I think for a lot of us, again, as I made a previous comment, it all sits in our own head. I think we are biased that it has to be done only one way. So that's the first part. I think that a lot of companies have moved into the digital marketing enablers, that you can get access to information about my product, my company, and you can also touch my product, feel the product in a way through the digital tools that are available. I gave a talk to a leadership team last week who does some very complicated procedures for aortic valve replacement. And they have the modality now to train a doctor sitting in his office, his or her office. From their end, they can control and show how it is all done virtually. So the virtual simulations and all have gone a long way out there. What I think has not really gone yet to the level where I think Ashikresh made a comment on that also is the commercialization output of that. That means you don't have hospital purchasing arms very excited to get on a web-based portal and make their ordering, right? I think it's still a little weak. Many years, 20 years ago, there was something called Bax Global. I don't know if those of you are old enough to remember, but there was something like that created. It never worked out. It was actually a platform which anybody can go and buy online. So I think it is not happening because there are so many stakeholders who are holding back on it. It's a matter of time before that will also take off. So we just need to be aware, get your first part ready, that your product is accessible to multiple media channels into a customer. The second part of the purchasing element, I think, is also going to happen sooner or later.
Great, thanks for that, Sanjay. I wanted to just stay with you for a second and I think talk very briefly about commercial leadership qualities. As a startup is looking to scale and build a commercial team, what are some of the key qualities they should be looking for? And maybe I'll ask Ken to comment on this as well. Very often, a startup may look to a multinational to bring in a senior sales executive, say from an MNC. Are some of the leadership requirements, the experience relevant for a startup, or are there some unique qualities that startups should look for? Sanjay.
The word is, we use the word entrepreneur because it is somebody from the outside, but it is no different on the inside. We use the word intrapreneur, right? So the intrapreneur is it's the same definition, but you work within the corporate ecosystem. So the role of a commercial leader is to build and grow businesses. And it is no different on the inside or on the outside. So a startup leader should not think about a large multinational leader thinking in any different way. Now, which vector of the growth are you focused on? Are you focused on market share? That means you're going out to take a share from somebody else. That is one element of leadership. There's another, which is market development or building a new market space. That takes different skills. So you need to think about, when you're a company with a product, what is your space you're operating in? Are you going to be out there to take share from somebody else? Then you need somebody who's a battle-scarred veteran who knows how to fight the very well-established multinationals. So if you're a company coming into the cardiac stent business and you say, I've got a brand new stent, and you're going to go and run into people like Ken, who's running Biotronik, and they've got a stent, Medtronic's got a stent, Boston Scientific, Abbott, they're all companies who are well established. So what can you bring in to make a difference? That's maybe the one thing you got to think about. On the other side, if you're developing a new market, that's a very different skill set you need to have, or a market or a therapy area, right? Now, what are the skills? So I think that entrepreneurial skill set or the entrepreneurial skill set is most probably the most transferable, what I would look at. Now, why do startups go look for established leaders in companies or multinationals? Because they feel it gives them the, when they go into a conversation with a third party, they can always say, look, my leader used to work for this big company. That immediately gives a certain credence to the conversation. But not every large multinational leader is suitable to be in a startup. I don't know whether I can be successful in a startup because I'm also, my muscles are very powered up in a large multinational environment. So if you put me out of my environment, I need to be able to have that skill sets to survive in a smaller organization. And those are very different for individuals. There's a saying, I think, that if you take a McKinsey consultant out of McKinsey, they may not succeed the same way they succeed within McKinsey. So the ecosystem sometimes also props you up. So look for leaders who show the ability to stand out and build businesses, not depending only on the core competence of an organization's withhold, but they also have that ability to scale up or scale down very quickly. And they're very comfortable in that zone.
Very useful perspectives there, Sanjay. Thank you. And Ken, from your viewpoint, you've scaled up commercial organizations and most recently at Bardi and then helped them get a very successful exit. What do you typically look for in people as you build your commercial organizations, and what tips can you give to startups looking to scale?
Yeah, sure. So I've spent a lot of time on this particular topic. I think you really, at least from my perspective, it all starts with people and culture. And so you want somebody who can bring in the right people and who can build the right culture. And if you don't have that, you can have the best product in the world, and you're not going to be able to commercialize it at the pace that the company will want, that the investors want, and really that you want. So it starts with that. So you want somebody who can really be passionate about the company and why the company is in existence. Be passionate about the vision and the mission of the product and the company, and to be able to tell the story of the company, not only to customers, but to people that you're recruiting. I mean, coming into a startup, and if you're trying to recruit people from a bigger company that might have existing relationships, so you're trying to recruit them to a startup from a bigger company that's a well-established multinational company, you got to be able to tell that story, and you have to be able to be passionate about the story. So I think that those components are really, really critical. I think the perseverance to go through the ups and downs and the roller coaster that startups go through is really, really important. Sometimes people get comfortable with the bigger company resources that you have, with a big marketing team and all these resources at your disposal. And a startup, you got to get your hands dirty. You have to be involved in so many different things. So you have to make sure that people are willing to do that, and willing to adapt the strategy and quickly change to survive. I mean, when you're in a startup, you're really in survival mode the whole time that you're commercializing. And so you can't stay in your comfort zone, and you've got to find people that are willing to do all those things that I just mentioned.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Shikharesh, did you want to say something there as well, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for giving me the time. So I just want to add that, I have seen a tendency in the Asian startups for founders to stay on for the commercialization phase, and that can be pretty dangerous. Like what we heard from Ken and Sanjay, you require different set of skills for going to the market. So please realize that first time when you start with the concept and ready for the product to be moving into the market, you've been spending money, seed money, your own money, grant money. After they're going to be earning money. That's probably a different set of skills in terms of closing the deals and relationships. So I just wanted to drop in a point there that is good to sort of step aside and bring in expertise where you need them for a successful commercialization.
Yeah, thanks for that. So let's talk a little bit more. We have 15 minutes left about distributors and working with them. And Shikresh, maybe I'll just stay with you here for a second in terms of, you can perhaps give us your perspective on what might be the best way for a startup to find a distributor. There's a common conception or misconception perhaps that you find them at trade shows. And surely there must be other ways. And what's the value, ideally, that a distributor should bring? And I'll ask Sanjay maybe to comment on this as well in a moment, because you've obviously been managing large distributor networks. Shikresh.
Sure. So that's probably the toughest part of going to the market, finding the right partner. And what has been happening in the marketplace is there has been a lot of consolidations in different countries. So distributors have now more bargaining power. So it's in a way bias power, and they actually get to select the companies they work with. And make no mistakes, distributors are driven by profit. So where a startup goes in and says that I have this fantastic product which is going to change your way of life, but you got to go to the adoption process for 9 months, they usually raise their hands. So to your fundamental question of how do you find these distributors, I think go back to your value proposition and see what's the problem you're trying to solve. And instead of the whole product gamut, just look at the one thing and find those distributors who are playing there. They need not be big multinationals. They doesn't have to be panning the whole country. Find somebody who's passionate, find somebody who you have chemistry with. And this was slightly easier earlier days where you could fly to a country and actually meet them over the trade shows or physical meetings. But having said that, there are other ways because most of the people, traditional distributors have now adopted digital technology. They're accessible. So first thing is find somebody who is you can work with, has similar set of passion for that specific segment. In terms of value they bring, we touched upon this earlier briefly. You're actually outsourcing your whole commercial operations to another person. So depending on typically you do it two ways. Either you retain some of the competencies within an organization, like maybe accounts management and clinical stuff, or you outsource everything in a country. So my preference is initially, when you go to the first country outside your home country, you retain the relationships with the key accounts within yourselves and outsource everything like inventory management. You can outsource your sales process. And so the value that they bring is that they're giving you a quick cash flow, assured cash flow in a way. In turn, they're giving you access to the market. But my parting advice again would be keep those key relationships to yourself.
Yeah, and thanks for that. And Sanjay, when either in your Baxter days or Hologic, when you work with distributors, do they typically play the same role in every market, or is it in some cases you work with them purely for logistic services? In others, it's collection and maybe inventory management, and in some they do the whole gamut as Shikresh outlined.
Sure. So Frederick, I'll just maybe add a comment to Shikresh's previous.
Please do.
Right. So how to find a distributor? In the earlier days, we used to fly into a country, go around talking to the KOLs, and then through them we would find out who is, because we would have met the KOL at some national forum, and we would then ask them, would you recommend someone? And that was the only approach. Now there's a good and bad to it. The good was it was somebody that the KOL recommended. The bad, it was somebody the KOL recommended. So if anytime you let them go, you would be in trouble, right? I mean, the consequences, the relationships are too close. But today, what I would recommend for many of you who are trying to start up is the power of LinkedIn kind of tools. You can put it to use, right? Because if you reach out there and say, look, I'm looking for a distributor in Vietnam. Now, if you just say, I'm looking for a distributor in Vietnam, is a very open-ended statement. Nobody has a clue what you're looking for. So be very clear in asking, look, I'm looking for a partner in this space of healthcare who deals with this kind of specialty or that kind of specialty. If you put it out there, I can guarantee you there's somebody who will respond back saying, look, why don't you check out this or check out that? That can be your first start point. Once you get your pinky through the door, like we say in sales, you can then get your hand through the door and your shoulder and your body, and now you build a relationship. Because once you find one person, the network starts opening up for you. So start thinking of that and not just, okay, I need to get it all crystal clear, locked down before I start. Now coming, Frederick, to your question, we used partners in different models, right? And this goes back to what we intend to do in a country. First, we need to define for ourselves what is our core competence, and Shikaresh mentioned that out. Our core competence has to be the ability to sell the product because that's what we bring in. But let's say is accounting or logistics or moving the boxes our core competence? Maybe not. So the way I would always look at it is I would put everything out on the table, selling, building the relationship, because that is where the highest value comes in. You can always move the moving the boxes decision from person A to person B at any point. Whoever can give you a better deal. But if you remove that commercial aspect away, then you're at mercy of somebody else who's going to dictate the terms to you.
Great point. Thank you for that. Quick reminder to our cohort, if you have any questions, please queue them up using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them in about 10 minutes time or so. Excuse me, Ken, quick question for you. We have the majority of companies that are now in our startups in our cohort are based outside of the US. So what advice might you have for a non-US medtech startup that is looking to work with a distributor in the US and build a distribution channel into the US? What are some of the things to think about and potential pitfalls?
Yeah, I think great question. And I think one thing to do for sure, if you have VCs that are invested in the company, or if you have big strategics that are invested in your company, is to ask them, hey, do you have any other companies in your portfolio that sell to the same customers? And, you know, who are the distributors that they use, and who have you had the most success with? That's one of the things that we did to find good distributors. And I've had good experiences with distributors, and I've had some not so great experience with distributors. And you've got to be really, really careful and take the time to find the right partner, because the wrong one can set you back significantly in terms of time, and you typically will get tied into the whoever the partner is for a number of years. So if you pick the wrong partner, it's almost like you're having to start over again when you switch to another distributor, and it's a painful process having gone through it. So I would be going to the conferences and seeing like who has a big presence at your industry conferences, and asking around, ask not just investors, but just, you know, I think key opinion leaders, it is tricky there because you don't want them to introduce you to someone that maybe they're friends with, and it's not necessarily going to be the best partner for you. But I would still ask them just to get their take on, you know, do you deal with any distributors? Who do you like best? It's one touch point. But even through accelerators, I think MedTech Innovator is a great partner to talk to as well about who are good distributors within the US.
Right. Thanks. Good point, Ken. A challenge, I guess, for many startups is how do they keep their distributors motivated? They don't have a big brand. They're usually completely unknown, and obviously they can hopefully differentiate, have a product that's highly differentiable. But typically, how do you motivate distributors? How do you keep them loyal and successful in the long term? And Sanjay, from a multinational's perspective, I guess it's relatively easier if you are carrying a business card from Hologic or Baxter.
I agree. I think, Freddie, that's a great question, right? Yes, if it's a large company, naturally, they want a large company on their portfolio to show the other potential clients that, look, I'm a Baxter, or I'm a Hologic, or I'm a Boston Scientific distributor. So I think that's clearly a little more easier. But having said that, even with large companies, we also compete with other large companies for the same channel partners sometimes, right? So it's not that, so I know that when most of the startups who are listening here think, oh, geez, we have a tough life and the multinationals have an easy life. It's the grass is greener on the other side. When you come into our world, you realize that we also have something similar sounding problems. The only thing is the scale and the magnitude is very different. That's all. Right. So I think that's kind of thing. Now, what does a distributor want? So let's kind of go back into the core of what excites them. Well, one, the ability to make money. So they are always interested in knowing how much money are they going to make, right? So clearly that's there. Now with large multinationals, generally their ability to make money is very limited. So the margins are very tight. Why? Because we set the price points at which we give them our product, and we do it based on what we know is the market pricing, the competitive pricing, and also because of compliance requirements, we make sure that they're only given a certain margin, a very tight margin. So they don't have a lot of room to earn a lot. So they earn a small margin on a large volume. When they look at a startup, they're potentially looking at a large margin on a small volume. So you have to also define out in your price point how you go. If you go and say, I'm only going to give you the same margin that multinationals give you, guys most probably going to say, go fly a kite, right? So you'll have to think about what is the right value proposition in terms of the commercial element. The second is if your product is something unique that the distributor, when they take it to the customer who's a KOL, is going to get excited because they say, this product you're representing it enhances their reputation or their value in the eyes of a KOL. So they're always looking at bringing in something innovative to a customer that makes a distributor stand out. When they have 10 distributors standing in a line, this one stands out because they have a very unique product that they're representing. And they start getting branded out over a period of time as a distributor that brings in some unique products and not is just there to make money and thinking a little more than just a kind of a transactional deal. The third I would say is how do you as a company incentivize or recognize them? Now for large companies, I'll tell you what we do. We would do an annual distributor meet where we bring all the distributors, right? We rank them on their performance on various metrics, and we run performance like the way we look at our sales teams. We exactly monitor distributors on the same way. So we would do a ranking, performance, all that, and they know who's going to get the plaque and who's not going to get a plaque. Now, when you walk into a distributor's office, in the shelf behind them, you'll always see they have the plaque of all the best distributor award of all the companies laid out there.
Right.
So you can also find a way to incentivize them in that sense. So that would be another way to think about. So those are the 3 steps I would just say.
Yeah, that's very useful, Sanjay. Thanks for that. Very quickly, we're almost up to the top of the hour. I just wanted to get your perspectives on what if you need to part ways with a distributor for whatever reason. What are some of the potential risks and challenges involved in that? And maybe Shikaresh, I'll turn to you on that. And I know product registration and some of the challenges around that is usually top of mind.
Yeah, so thank you, Frederick. So there are a few things that happen when you part with as a distributor. One is the legal part of it and compliance part of it. Second part is the customer relations part of it. So let me comment on the legal part first. So previously, probably 5 to 10 years back, it was customary for distributors to hold the license in the company, in the country, and they would use it as a leveraging point for negotiations. That has changed a lot. And in most of the countries, you will find these independent service providers who can hold the import license for you. So that sort of get neutralized, though many distributors, specifically in China, do not agree to that model. They use it as a part of the negotiations. Secondly, second part of it is your IB, install base, and your customer relationships. So whenever a switch happens, customer is the one that is left hanging. So you have to ensure that as a precursor to that, whenever a product is sold, you need to ensure that the customer records come back into the country. And this can be baked into the agreement that anytime a product is sold, whether it's a device or a multi-million-dollar equipment, the customer details and all that thing should come back into the parent company for them to reach out back to the customer and continue the communication. The second part, relations, and I think I covered that earlier a bit. So in a country, let's say you have 200 accounts or whatever, out of that, you need to choose maybe 5 to 10 top key accounts and manage the relationship yourself. Go down there every quarter and make friends with the purchase department, whatever. So all these things, it will still happen probably, this distributor switch, but all these things made the switch much less painful when you need to pull the cord.
Thank you for that. Very, very helpful. Gentlemen, we have many more questions, but it is now 11 o'clock. I will, before we close, I wanted to just ask each of you to perhaps give any final words of advice to the founders, the CEOs of our cohort startups as they begin thinking about commercialization. Any last tips? And maybe Ken, I'll turn to you first on that.
Yeah, I think specifically with MedTech Innovator, because of the relationships they have, because they have a good number of companies that are working with them. Don't be afraid to ask people within MedTech Innovator for help. If you don't ask for help and specific help, then I wouldn't wait for the help to come to you. I think is what I'm trying to say is be proactive. And if you're proactive and leverage some of the relationships that you can get through networking through the MedTech Innovator Network, it can lead to venture capital investments. It can lead to strategic investments. It can lead to other accelerators after MedTech Innovator that can help you in different ways. So I think that's probably the best advice I can give.
Yeah, great feedback, Ken. Thank you for that. And Shikaresh, some thoughts from you.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, I'm always, enamored by the spreadsheets and data tables. So I would urge everyone to go back and review this presentation and note down all the Frederick comments and grade yourself on where do you stand today. And if you are doing well, I think you are okay. If you think you're not doing well, you need to bring up those competence in the organization. And another additional thing would be look at your first overseas country very, very carefully and see that your capability in terms of your cultural and other resources to work in that country and ensure that you have a paying customer in that country in terms of the market size. So the two things I'll leave you with.
Thank you, Shikaresh. And Sanjay, some final words of advice from you.
Thank you, Frederick. So maybe I'll leave you with three key comments. So first is be clear on what is your strategic intent. And I think I alluded to that earlier in our conversation, right? Are you trying to build a long-term company here, or are you just here for the quick tactical win? I think a lot of your decisions and actions will then depend on that. The second is build your commercial excellence muscle. Because when you're a startup, most probably you have the innovation muscle very strong, but not the commercial execution capability or muscle. So you got to, as a leader, as a founder, you most probably also don't have it unless you're a commercial leader who's now running a startup of your own, right? So you need to start thinking how to build that capability and how to run simulations within your organization early enough and not too late. And the third, I would say, is when you go in for physical fitness, they always ask you to strengthen your core. Right, the core is what they say, make your core stronger than everything else stands on it. For me, the core is always defined, and in leadership, when I talk about, is defined as the word rice, the same rice that you eat, the carbohydrate rice, right? It refers to resilience being the first, right? You need to be very resilient in what you do because you know this thing. If they throw you out of the door, come back through the window. They'll throw you out of the window, come back through the chimney, or in Asia, come in through the balcony, right? So that's your resilience. The second is integrity. There's a right way and an easy way, right? Always stay on the right path because that is otherwise it's a downhill slope. The third is curiosity, right? Need to be curious beyond the product into what happens beyond that, into the commercialization elements. And the fourth is the empathy, because you're building an organization. You're not dealt much with people, but more with products and technology and science. And in commercial world, you're only dealing with people, and people make the difference. You give me a great salesperson with a mediocre product that is better than a great product with the mediocre sales rep. So that's how you make a difference, right? That's it. Thank you.
Great advice, Sanjay. Thank you so much, and thank you to all our panelists, Ken, Shikaresh, Sanjay, for being part of this discussion this morning. Some terrific insights here. Do stay on for our 30-minute Q&A, but at this point we will thank our YouTube viewers and we will stop our live feed. So thank you